Okay, as I promised, we're going to start right at 5. I want to make sure that we give enough time for you to get out and get some good seats for the Gospel of John presentation. So I'm just going to open with prayer, and then Pastor Bryan's going to take it from there. Lord God, as we read through Numbers and Deuteronomy, we are just amazed at your grace and your patience, your faithfulness to your promises. And Lord, it gives us great hope to know that you are faithful and you will uphold all the promises that you've made to us through Jesus Christ. Lord, I pray that as we look into Joshua and Judges and life of Saul, Lord, I pray that we would continue to be impressed with your faithfulness, and that we would learn more about the great salvation we have through Jesus Christ. We pray all these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Got a bunch to cover, so we're going to go. Joshua, as you finish up reading Deuteronomy, Joshua falls right on the heels of Deuteronomy. I mean, it's within days, because what happens to Deuteronomy ends, and they're on the east side of the Jordan, and as Joshua begins, they're getting ready to cross over the Jordan into the Promised Land, and to begin to take possession of that. As you get to Joshua, they've already taken the land on the east side of the Jordan. They've taken where they're going to actually settle. Some of their folks are going to settle over there. Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh are going to live on that side of the Jordan. Yet they make a promise to Moses, saying that they will go ahead and go with them in conquest and do that. As you open up Joshua, Moses is now dead. Joshua is the leader, and Joshua is attempting to establish himself as leader and to move the people into the land. That's really the idea of the beginning of Joshua. It falls. It's named Joshua because that's who is the main character in the book is Joshua as the leader of the nation. Likely written by Joshua, but more than likely edited at the end, because Joshua's death is talked about, and I don't think Joshua wrote about his own death. So probably not all the way through, but someone edited it at the end. But likely the book is written by Joshua, just because of the intimate first-hand knowledge of some of the details, especially the scene. That's not where he's with God, and God says, this book of the law will not depart out of your mouth. That seems to be very, very intimate, and he knows exactly what the details of that. So it seems like a first-hand account of at least that situation and other key situations as they walk through the book. Moses dies in about 1404 BC, just before the conquest. That's when Moses dies. And so the book of Joshua goes from 1404 BC to about 1375 BC when Joshua died. So it covers about 29 years. So we went from the first 5 books that covered thousands of years to now Joshua that's going to cover 29 years. The main idea of this book is the conquest. It is the taking of the land. It is the re-entering the land from the Jews. Remember, back at the end of Genesis, Jacob and his sons, at least 11 of them, are living in the Promised Land. Living the land where Abraham had been called to go. From the Ur of Chaldees, Abram had gone there, been changed to Abraham. He was living there. There was extreme famine in the land. You remember that Joseph is down in Egypt, and as a way to escape the famine, Jacob and his sons, the other 11, come down to Egypt, and they live there. They live there for 430 years, and they're taken from there to the wandering in the wilderness. And so now we're actually on the edge, the verge of going into the land and realizing those promises that they hadn't realized yet. So the main idea is conquest. One of the struggles that you might have as you get through the book of Joshua, you may struggle with why does God hate the Canaanites? Because it feels like, man, God really doesn't like these people. He has set them out for destruction. In fact, you're going to read, as you read through what God calls the people to do is he calls them to utterly destroy and drive out every one of these people, every one of these nations. Why does God hate these Canaanites so well? I mean, men, women, and children, it seems really harsh that God would do this. But the destruction of the Canaanites goes all the way back to the story of Noah after the flood. It goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 9. If you recall, when Noah came off of the ark, he planted himself a vineyard. And as he's planted a vineyard, after a period of time passes, we don't know how long, Moses actually drinks some of the wine from that vineyard and he gets drunk. After he gets drunk, his son Ham and his grandson Canaan apparently do something. It's called something sexual too. We don't know what it is, but there's something there. And in Genesis chapter 9, verse 25, when Noah responds, what comes out of his mouth is, "Cursed be Canaan." And so what we have really in the conquest is the fulfillment of that curse starting to be acted out upon the Canaanites. That's what's going on. The Canaanites were not nice people. The Canaanites were really evil people. They were sensual people. They worshipped Baals and Ashtaroths. I won't go into great detail of what that means, but their worship was not going to church and singing nice worship songs. Their worship was evil at its core. That's why there's so much instruction in Deuteronomy and in the Pentateuch saying, don't be like them, don't do that stuff, don't participate in their kinds of worship, because it will destroy you. So the Canaanites are set for destruction, are laid out for destruction from Genesis chapter 9, verse 25. The book of Joshua just goes through some of the beginning of that. Although as we get to the end of the book of Joshua, we find out that the Jews didn't really do what they were supposed to do. They didn't utterly drive out. Not one tribe utterly drove out everybody they were supposed to drive out. So that is kind of the main idea, and one of the key things to kind of think of as you're reading through. One of the things you may struggle with is why destroy the Canaanites, and that's why it goes back to that. Key themes from the book. First is, a lot of the key themes come out of the first several chapters of the book. First is God's continuing presence with his people. Moses has passed off the scene. Joshua has stepped in and been installed as leader. And even with the formal installation that you were going to read about in Deuteronomy, where it's a formal thing, it wasn't like there was no power struggle. It's interesting to me that a lot of times when you have a religion and there's a leader of a religion that falls or dies, a lot of times there's a power struggle for the next person to take it over. We've seen that in several world religions. One of the key world religions was Joseph Smith with the Mormons. When he died, there was this huge power struggle between Joseph Smith and Joseph Smith's kids and Brigham Young. Brigham Young leads the Mormons. Joseph Smith's kids leads the reorganized Latter-day Saints that meet over in Independence. Those are reorganized Mormons. Don't call them that; they get mad when you do. But that's a power struggle. When Muhammad died, there was a huge power struggle between his followers, and that's where you get the Sunni Muslims and the Shia Muslims from, is that power struggle. But what God did, it's interesting to me, what God did through Moses' death, and it would seem there could have been an easy power struggle between Moses' descendants, we are the rightful leaders, but he stopped that on the front side because he clearly chose Joshua to be the continued leader, and he set that up back in Genesis. The people were Deuteronomy. The people were convinced, but Joshua wasn't. The people were convinced that Joshua was to be the leader, but Joshua wasn't. Joshua, I can't do this. I can't do this. And so he's really questioning his ability, and that's when God appears to him and basically gives him this encouragement. The book of the law will not depart out of your mouth. You'll meditate on it day and night. Then you'll make your way prosperous, and then you'll have good success. So God promises success to Joshua as long as Joshua stays in the truth. God promised to abide with him. So that's one of the key themes. And you're going to see God's presence with Israel throughout the conquest. It's God is going to go before them. God goes before them, and God drives out people before them. And as long as they trust God, as long as they do what he says and recognize he's with them, God keeps his promise. God keeps his promise of faithful, abiding presence. I think another theme you see is the importance of following God's instructions. just in the beginning of the book, there are at least 3 times when Israel has to follow God's instruction, and they have to follow it completely to a T, and it makes 0 sense what he's calling them to do. First time you see it is when they're going to cross the Jordan. Understanding the Jordan is at flood stage. The Jordan is probably at least a mile wide, and it's running at flood stage. It's running huge. Now, when we go to Israel in May, in June, you're going to see the Jordan River, and you're going to think, really? That's hard to cross? You could jump across the Jordan River, and you really could. Where we're going to see the Jordan River, you probably could get a good running jump and get across the thing with no problem whatsoever. It's not huge, but it is huge when it was at flood stage. It was a big deal to get across this river. It was served as a big dividing line. And so what God says is, here, I'm going to get you across the river. Remember, Moses is gone. Moses' staff is no more. There's no one to stand up and hold his staff over and let the waters part. And so now Joshua's thinking, how am I going to do this? And so the instruction is, have the priests take the ark, step into the Jordan. And as soon as they step in, then the water will part. It's interesting. It wasn't the water will part and then they can step in. It's no, you step in and then the water will part. If they hadn't done that, they'd still be on the east side of the Jordan. But they believed, they trusted, they did exactly what God had said. They stepped in, the water parted, and they crossed. They crossed the Jordan. Another early in the book is the what's the name of the city? Jericho. Jericho. Thank you. Jericho. It would not come to my head. Where God says, here's what you're going to do for Jericho. I'm going to give you this great battle plan, because if you understand who Jericho was this great walled city. The walls of Jericho were like almost a wonder of the world. They were tall, and Jericho was a fortress city that was hard to get into. And it's interesting. That's the first place God takes them in the land, is to one of the most fortified cities in the place. You have this group of Jews who really have never fought much before in their life, except for they're walking up the east side of the Jordan, and he takes them to Jericho first, to this walled city that would seem impossible to get in. I think he does that on purpose, by the way. And it gives them, okay, so here's the battle plan. Joshua says, how are we supposed to take the city? And God says, here's your battle plan. 6 days, everybody get in the line and walk around the city once. On the 7th day, walk around it 7 times. And you get around the 7th time, everybody shout real loud. Blow trumpets and shout, scream real loud, and just wait and see what happens. And so, you know, if I'm much in, I'm thinking that's not going to work. You know, hey God, that's just not. I love your plan. That's kind of silly. But they follow the plan. They do what they're supposed to do, and the walls fall down, and they take Jericho just as God had promised they were going to do. So I'm going to skip. I'm going to just move forward, because you're never going to be good seats. You're just not going to get good seats. So there's the importance of following God's instruction, and they see that. I think that's a theme for them and for us. I think you see in the book of Joshua the universality of God's love and God's plan. Why I say it is because we have introduced to us here the story of Rahab. The story of Rahab. Rahab is a person who God should not have loved. God should not have cared for. And it's neat to see how God singled her out to do something wonderful in her life. She's a prostitute who lives on the wall. She does hide the spies. We're not going to talk about whether or not she should have lied. The fact is, she did lie, and God saved the spies. Could he have saved the spies any other way? Absolutely, he could have. She's never committed for lying. She's committed for believing God. That's the point. So if you want to talk about that later, talk to somebody else. But he shouldn't. But God singled her out, a woman who was a Gentile, not just a Gentile, a Canaanite, and a prostitute, and yet God set his affection on her. And it shows that God's grace is available to any who would receive his grace. So I think that's neat to see the universality and really God's work in her. I think you see the danger of presumption. The danger of presumption shown here in the book. After they have the success at Jericho, they decide, you know what, Ai or I, however you want to say that word, is not a very big city. We got this. We can go take this thing just fine. So they presume upon God. They think they got this. They go, and they don't have it at all. They're defeated and destroyed. 3,000 die in that day when they should have taken it. And because they didn't actually seek God first. And actually Joshua's kind of upset with God. Joshua's mad at God. He goes to God and says, how come you let this happen? Thought you said you're going to be with us. And God says, I am with you, but you're not with me. You're not with me. You didn't even check. You didn't even ask. You didn't even come to me and ask. If you would have come to me, I would have told you there's sin in the camp. There's sin in the camp. And you need to deal with that, and then I'll be with you again. So we see the danger of presumption. I think we see the seriousness of sin, the serious nature of sin. Just Achan. Did he do anything really that bad? He didn't kill anybody. He didn't commit adultery. All he did was see some stuff and say, that looks nice. I think I'll take that. And it wasn't even really stealing, except stealing, in a sense, stealing from God, I guess. But because of that, God, first of all, has them fail when they went against Ai. And then after it's found out, then Achan and his family are all killed. Because of this sin. So I think you see the seriousness of sin. As you go through the rest of the book, I think you'll continue to see God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises, because this nation does take the land that they were supposed to take. So there's God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promise. And then finally, the importance or the need for tearing down idols. Tearing down idols. That's something that's on display here, and that will be on display then throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Joshua sets up the fact that idols didn't get torn down, idols didn't get destroyed, and that's going to be a problem that Israel faces all the way until the Babylonian captivity. It's not until that. Once they go to captivity in Babylon, Israel never again struggles with idolatry. Never again with idolatry. It takes them until the Babylonian captivity to get that. But if they would have done what they were supposed to do back in Joshua, that would not have been a problem. So that's the need. So what are some of what's the outline? I have a 4-point outline, and it's entrance into the land, chapters 1 through 5, conquest of the land, chapters 6 through 12, division of the land, chapters 13 through 21, and service in the land, 22 through 24. Those are the outline. That's not the same outline you got last year. So if you went through this last year, you got a new outline now. Now you have more than one outline to go through the book of Joshua with. Again, one of the interesting stories that is always is the story of the tribe of Dan. Tribe of Dan, who was given land down in Judah. If you know where Dan is today, they are not down in Judah. They actually stole land from their brothers because they couldn't take the land they were supposed to get. They didn't trust God to give them the land, so they went and actually stole land from one of the other tribes. So, and it wasn't a nice steal either. It was really bad. So those are kind of some of the fun things that you'll see as you go through the book of Joshua. There is Joshua. Well, we flew through that one. It's only 20 after. 4 more books. Judges. Judges is next. Judges. The time of Judges. Most people start the time of Judges with Joshua, 1375, or as Joshua dies, 1375. And it goes until Samuel dies. So the Judges go from the death of Joshua to the death of Samuel. So basically from 1375 to about 1055. That's the time frame that the book of Judges covers. Judges are not kings. Judges are not kings. They are leaders. They're leaders, but they're leaders underneath the authority of God. And they're leaders for a specific purpose and a specific time, and oftentimes just for some specific tribes. They're not necessarily leaders for all of Israel. They're leaders for parts of Israel. To understand, I think we get in our head that once Israel comes out of Egypt, they now become this United States of America, but Jewish. You know, where you have 13 you have 12 original colonies or 12 original tribes that formed themselves into this one federal state. That's absolutely not true. That's absolutely not true.
I still think that way too. I'm so glad you said that, because I think of that a lot.
Yeah, we get this, and I think it's because we are the United States of America. That's the way a nation must work, right? That's not the way the nation worked at all. There were 12 individual tribes, and they really sometimes hated each other. As you read the book of Judges, you will not like Ephraim at all. They are not nice people. The Ephraimites are not nice people. They actually instituted at least 2 civil wars against other tribes of Israel because they want their land. Dan, not a nice group of people. It's interesting to me that as you go through the history of the Jews, as you get to Revelation, there are 12 tribes mentioned in Revelation. The 12 tribes where the 144,000 witnesses come from. If you do the math, if you read that, there's 2 tribes missing. Ephraim and Dan are not there. You have Manasseh and Joseph listed in the Revelation. I think that's on purpose. I don't think that's an accident. Dan, because Dan is super idolatrous. When we go to Israel, we're going to go to Tel Dan, and we're going to see where Jeroboam put the golden calf, one of the golden calves that he built and put in the northern nation. We're going to see the place where that calf was and the foundation for the temple for that calf. We're going to see that. It was very, very much idolatrous. And Ephraim's not there because they were just nasty people. They're just nasty. That's the best way to describe them. So they're not a unified nation. Most of the time, the judge wasn't a judge for all of the nation. He was a judge for part of the nation. And so that's what the judges were. What we do know is by the time Judges introduces itself to us, the people have gotten into the land, and within one generation they've forgotten God. Their plan, their command by God was to go into the land and utterly drive out everybody in front of them. The first 3 chapters of Judges serve as a sad reminder that they didn't do that. They didn't utterly drive out. Well, this tribe is going to take this land, but there's an epitaph. They didn't utterly drive out all the inhabitants before them. This tribe took this land, but they didn't utterly drive out the tribes before them. This tribe took this land. You're going to read that over and over and over again, so that the summary statement is made. There arose a generation in Israel that did not know God. That's one generation in the land. One generation in the land. Which speaks volumes to what they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to go, they were supposed to teach to their kids. You know, when you got up, when you lie down, when you go in, you go out, Deuteronomy chapter 6. Obviously that didn't happen. Obviously that did not happen. Because there was a generation that arose that did not know God. There are 12 judges. There are 12 judges. And each judge serves as part of, as a leader, again, not a king, but a leader. The book of Judges sets itself up in a series of cycles. A series of cycles. There's a cycle of, and we're going to start with the sin cycle, okay? Because that's how really the book of Judges starts. It starts with the sin cycle. The nation or the tribe or a large portion lets themselves or falls into, actually choose, I hate that word falls into, chooses to sin. Chooses to worship false idols, chooses to worship false gods, chooses to turn their back on God. And God, in honor of his word and in faithfulness to keep his word, raises up an oppressor. An oppressor that comes and takes them captive and oppresses them. Doesn't take them out of the land, but oppresses them in the land. So there's a cycle of sin, and then there's a period of oppression. Sometimes it lasts 40 years, sometimes it lasts longer, but there's a period of oppression that raises itself up, where the people are enslaved by or in bondage to or oppressed by one of the nations around them, oftentimes a Canaanite nation who is oppressing them. The people then call out to God for deliverance. They recognize their sin, they recognize their situation, and they cry out to God for deliverance. So God raises up a judge. And when he raises up, it's not like, a guy sitting in robes that, guilty. It's not the judge was one who would be like Moses, like Joshua, would be the one who would be the leader of the people in the place of God and help them through this situation, and would be the one who would, like Moses, when people had disputes and stuff, they would come to him and he would handle those disputes. So So that's what the judge would do. He would raise up that judge, and then after there was victory or deliverance, then there would be a period of peace. Sometimes that peace lasted 40 years, sometimes it lasted a few years, but a period of peace where they would start off, the people of Israel would start off by following God well, and by the time it ended, complacency would grow, and they would then start to worship the false gods again, and there would be that cycle of sin again. And that happens over and over and over again. As you read, you'll read those cycles of sin, oppression, deliverance, peace. Sin, oppression, deliverance, peace. You'll see it over and over and over again. Each one of the judges. Some of the so the outline that I have for the book of Judges are the roots of apostasy, basically chapters 1 and 2. Results of apostasy, chapter 3 through 16. And the depths of apostasy, chapter 17 through 21. Some of the most famous Bible stories that you know come out of the book of Judges. Samson. Samson was a judge. If you think Samson was a hero, probably don't want to read the book of Judges, because you'll find out Samson was not really a nice guy. He was not really a hero. I mean, he did something good at the end of his life, but that was really it. Gideon, favorite story ever, is when Gideon is called to be a judge. I just love that story. Gideon is hiding in a well, threshing wheat, so the Midianites can't see him. And the angel of the Lord, which I believe to be Jesus, appears and says, "Hail, mighty man of valor." And Gideon, me? I don't know what you're talking. The sense of humor God has, because that's just funny. I'm sorry, that's just funny. Because he's not a mighty man; he's scared to death. In fact, he's scared to death. He's so scared to death, he gives God 4 tests to see. You really? Me? You sure? Anyhow, so Gideon is a funny story. Deborah and Barak are in there. Just lots of the key stories you've heard are found there in the book of Judges. One of the things that always impresses me with the book of Judges is who the first judge was. You know who the first judge was? Othniel. Oatmeal. Oatmeal. But Othniel, it's really interesting, his relationship, because if you remember in the wilderness, everyone in that generation died except Joshua and Caleb, right? Well, who is Othniel? Othniel is Caleb's nephew. So I'm convinced that Othniel probably lived in Caleb's house and probably heard, because Caleb was not one to be shy about who God is. And so while the generation rose up that didn't know God, there was one guy who did. And his name was Othniel. So it just contrasts a nation who didn't raise God up the way he should be and a family who did. I think that's a neat contrast. And I think it's neat that Othniel is the first judge. Othniel actually is a judge with character. Some of the others aren't. There are some judges that all you do is get their name. That's all you do is get their name. Some judges you get a whole bunch about. Gideon you get a whole bunch about. Samson you get a bunch about. Some you just get their name. The last judge is a guy named Samuel. And I know I'm supposed to do Joshua, Judges, and the life of Saul. But you can't get through Joshua and Judges without talking about Samuel and Ruth, right? Because they both fall in that time. Ruth comes in, and so we're going to talk about Ruth now. Ruth comes in the time of Judges. We know that because chapter 4 tells us it was the time of the Judges. So Ruth is in the time of Judges. We don't know the exact date, but we do know that Ruth is the great-grandmother of David, right? Ruth and Boaz have Obed, right? Obed has Jesse. Jesse has David. So it's grandson. Ruth is great-grandmother of David. And that's the significance of the book of Ruth. Really, the book of Ruth is significant. It establishes the lineage of David, of him being a Judean king, which is very, very important. So Ruth, again, the events take place in the time of Judges. What has happened is, as you open the book of Ruth, you find out that there is a famine that has taken place, and Naomi and Elimelech, who were good Jewish people from Bethlehem. Elimelech was the husband, Naomi was the wife, good Jewish people. They have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and there's famine, and so to escape the famine, they leave. They go to Midian. Or Moab. If you wonder where Moab is, we will see Moab again. I love this because we'll see Moab when we're in Israel. When we get to the Dead Sea, look across the Dead Sea, and you'll see mountains, and that's Moab. That's where they were. And if you think about where Bethlehem is right now, at least Bethlehem has some greenery. You look across where Moab is a desert. It looks terrible. And so they left Bethlehem to go to Moab in the middle of a famine. What were you thinking? Of course you're going to die. So anyway, they do that. They go to Moab, which is really not a nice place. It's not a great place to be. It's not lush and lots of vegetation and stuff. It's really in the middle of a desert. Moab is. And so, but they go there. While they're there, while they're in Moab, Mahlon and Chilion marry, take wives for themselves, Moabite women, which is an indication that their plan was never to go back. Their plan was never to go back. They were like Israel leaving the promised land, Egypt, that stayed there for a long time. I think Elimelech and Naomi's plan was never to go back because their kids, their sons, married Moabite women. One's name was Orpah. Sounds like a killer whale. One's name was Ruth. Ruth is not a Jewish name. Ruth is a Moabite name, by the way. Which is fine and interesting because there's a prohibition against a Jewish man, marrying a Moabite woman. There's a strict prohibition against that. Which again, I think is neat because we see the universality of God's plan and God's love for and God's plan for redemption. Because here's a woman who should have had no place in God's plan, a Moabite woman who now becomes part of the genealogy of Jesus. I think, and so is Rahab, by the way. Both Rahab and Ruth, who are people who should have been thrown off by God, a Canaanite woman and a Moabite woman, are both in the genealogy of Jesus. I think that's important because it's not about lineage. It's not about the country you come from. It's about the work of God in your heart that matters. That moves. So those are the main characters early in the book are Naomi and Elimelech, Ruth and Orpah, and Mahlon and Chilion. What we knew is they both die. Mahlon and Chilion die, and so does Elimelech, and so Naomi says, "Okay, gotta go home. Gotta go home." You remember she changes her name from Naomi to bitter, goes back, and then you have the whole story of Boaz and his love at first sight with Ruth, and the whole situation that comes. Big ideas in Ruth are really grace. I think grace is apparent in Ruth. The kinsman redeemer idea is big in the book of Ruth. Kinsman redeemer. Kinsman redeemer was a special plan that God had established for a wife of a Jewish man whose husband dies before she has children. She then is redeemed by a kinsman so that child can become. That man can continue to have descendants, which I find really kind of interesting because in the legal sense, Boaz is not Jesse's father, Mahlon is, because that's what the whole kinsman redeemer thing is all about. But in the genealogy, it's not listed that way. So, but one of the things I think that if you've ever read or seen a movie or read a book about Ruth, especially the movies, there's this at the end of the book. There's this scene that takes place where the rightful kinsman redeemer of Ruth and Boaz have a discussion at the city gate. And I actually saw one show where the rightful kinsman gets mad and he takes off his shoe and he throws it at Boaz. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. That was a symbol. That was the way that business was conducted. And when the man took off his shoe and gave it to Boaz, he was saying that rather than walking on that ground that should be mine, I'm giving that to you. That was the whole deal about that. So again, something to straighten out a little bit regarding history. So that's Ruth. What time are we going to be done?
5:45.
Okay, that's 10 minutes. I can probably make that work. All right, Samuel. I know we haven't even got to Saul. Samuel is a great story. You know the story of Hannah and Elkanah. Hannah, who had been barren, asks God for a child. Eli thinks she's drunk, but she says, no, I'm not drunk. And God answers that prayer. God gives her a child, and she names him Samuel, devoted to God. He's devoted to God from the womb on. He actually goes to live in the temple, goes to live at the tabernacle with Eli, who is the high priest. Eli, the high priest, is a descendant of Levi. Samuel is as well. Samuel is a Levite. He's going to become high priest. He needs to be a priest, otherwise he couldn't have fulfilled that place. But Eli is a high priest whose sons were just awful. They were awful. They weren't who they were supposed to be. So Samuel, Eli's sons die. Eli himself actually dies. Eli was a big man. According to Samuel, Eli was a really big man. And his sons they cheated God, really is what they did. The way you were supposed to cook the sacrifice was you were supposed to grill it. It was supposed to be barbecued, right? And so then the priest could take part that fell off. Well, what Eli's sons were doing is they were boiling the meat, and then they were sticking hooks down into the boiling pot and pulling out. Well, meat comes off the bone a lot better when it's boiled than it does when it's been barbecued. And so they were taking huge chunks of meat and basically cheating God. They both die. Eli's sons both die because of that. And Samuel goes and tells Eli the story, and Eli is so upset he falls over, breaks his neck, and he is dead. So then Samuel becomes the high priest and serves as high priest and judge for a while. Samuel serves as a faithful high priest for many, many years and a faithful judge for many years. He's doing a great job being a judge, and the people decide, we want a king. We want to be like everybody around us. Everybody around us has a king. We want a king too. And this is when you see the beginning of federalism in Israel. Up until this point, they've been really a confederacy of 12 individual tribes. By the time we hit the end of Samuel and the beginning of Saul, they're now wanting to federalize. They're wanting to become this one nation that is not, they wouldn't call it nation under God, they call it nation that they can be in charge of. And they want to be just like the nations around them. They want to have a king because I believe they think the king will provide for them security and peace and prosperity. And Samuel's first response is, no, you don't want a king. No, 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 no. And they say, yes, 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 yes. And Samuel says, no, 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 no. And they say, yes, 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 yes. So God says, okay. And Samuel says, okay, I'll ask God. And he'll be on my side. So Samuel goes to God and says, hey, they want a king. I know you don't want to have a king. God says, yeah, go ahead and give him one. Go ahead and give him one. And so God chooses Saul to be the first king. Saul is an interesting guy. Saul is an interesting guy. So that's in 1 Samuel 8 is when the people desire a king. So 1 Samuel 1 through 8 really is the story basically where Samuel's on display. As you hit chapter 8, now we transfer to Saul. What do we know about Saul? Well, God chooses Saul. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. He's not from the tribe of Judah. He's from the tribe of Benjamin, probably left-handed. He was supposed to have been very handsome and very tall. Very handsome and very tall. He was a kingly-looking king, which I think God did that on purpose, to show that it's not about outward looks that matters, because the guy who he chose to be king to replace Saul was a guy who didn't look like a king at all. Was a very unkingly looking king, a guy named David, who was ruddy and more than likely short and didn't have the appearance of a king, which I think actually transfers into the King of Kings, who Isaiah says he has no form or comeliness that we should desire him, and there's nothing about him that would make us want him. I think that's kind of it fits real well. He was actually made king then in chapter 10, verse 17. He is not a faithful king. He does some really good stuff. He has some really good things that he does. He wins some battles. He goes out and fights wars, but he fails on at least 3 occasions. He fails on at least 3 occasions. The first occasion he fails on is he fails when he offers an unlawful sacrifice. The story goes, he and the people have gone to a place and are waiting for Samuel to show up to offer a sacrifice. Saul gets impatient, can't wait anymore, so Saul does the sacrifice himself. Saul the king acts as a priest. That is illegal. That violates Jewish law for a king to act as a priest. And so Samuel calls him on that one. But God has grace. God lets him be king. Then God calls him to go to destroy the Amalekites. Talked about that a little bit in Sunday school this morning. The reason God calls him to destroy the Amalekites is because when they came out of Egypt, the Jews asked the Amalekites, let us pass through your land. And they said, no, you cannot pass through our land. They didn't treat their brothers nicely. They didn't treat them like they were brothers. And remember, they are cousins. Edom and Jacob, Esau and Jacob are the two that are in play here. And so God says, go destroy them. Well, Saul has a better idea. He destroys most of them, but there's a lot of really good cattle there, a lot of really good sheep there. We can take a lot of stuff and take it home. And I can take the king and his family back and show, ha-ha! I can put my foot on his neck and show how great of a guy I am. So he spares them. Samuel comes to him, and after the battle's over, Samuel comes and he hears cattle mooing and sheep bleating. And says, hey. And Saul's like, hey, we did it, man, cool, woohoo, yeah! And Samuel says, wait, is that mooing cows I hear? Where did those come from? What is that bleating of sheep I hear? What does that mean? Well, Saul is the perfect blame shifter. Well, the people wanted this. And so Samuel gets his sword out and hacks Agag to pieces. And so that then there's one more thing Saul does. After Samuel is dead, Saul goes to see the witch of Endor. A really great story. Really great story. You'll love reading this one. Really great story. Saul goes to see the witch of Endor, or the medium of Endor, I think is how she's referred to. He wants to ask Samuel a question. He wants to ask Samuel, is God really done with me? Is it true? And so Samuel is dead, and the witch of Endor is one, and it was illegal. It was wrong. It was violating the law again for a Jewish person to consult a sorceress. But he goes to consult her anyway, and she's fooled people for years. She's fooled people for years. She's done incantations and stuff. She's been the seance lady who's heard stuff. She's been that guy on TV who's, your grandma said she loves you and stuff like that, and keep going. That's what she's been. And she's been doing that. So she says, okay, I'll do this. Give me some money. Give me some cash. I'll do this. And she's doing it. And Samuel really shows up. And it scares her to death. It's, wow, I've never seen that before. I'm out of here. She's gone. Which is pretty significant. And then you'll read the rest of the story. I won't tell you that. But that's it. And so because of those things, Saul is rejected as king. The Spirit is taken away from him. Saul is rejected as king, and David becomes king. But it's interesting that David becomes king years before he becomes king. Many years before David becomes king, he becomes king. What do I mean? He was anointed king by Samuel the day he was chosen, but he didn't actually start serving as king until many years later. Many years later. And in fact, he becomes king of Judah before he becomes king of all of Israel. There's still that fragmentation going on, even to the point when David becomes king, because there's a fractured nation and then a solid nation after the fact. So in that interim time, you have the story of David and Goliath. David is really king when he kills Goliath, but he's not acting as king when he kills Goliath. David then goes on the run. He actually goes to live with the Philistines for a while because Saul wants him dead. Saul wants to kill him. You'll read of the story. You'll read of the relationship that David and Jonathan have and their close, tight friendship. And you'll read of where, and we actually get to go there in Israel again. We get to go to the place where Saul and his sons died. We'll see the hill where they died on. And that's at Bet Shean is where we'll see that. So and that's really quickly getting you through the book of... Did I give you the outline for Ruth? I did? Good. I don't have an outline for...
I didn't think you gave us big ideas in Ruth, but not the outline.
I did give big ideas, not the outline. I think I have an outline for Ruth.
If you want, you can give it to me.
I'll give it to David and send it out. Okay. It's 5:45. I did pretty good. I didn't finish it all. I didn't even get close to finishing it. That was not even a scratch on the surface. So, hopefully what that does, it just whets your appetite once you get in there. There's a ton of really fun stuff. You know, there's hard stuff. There's hard stuff. As you're reading through the book of Judges, there are times when you read the book of Judges where it's like, really? Really? You're really doing that, God? And then when you get into 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, there's some difficulty there. Push through, enjoy, and look at God's faithfulness. Look at God's faithfulness. I'm going to pray and then let you guys go. Lord, thank you for this time together. Thank you for your word that is so precious and so valuable. I pray that you would help us as we read through it in an organized fashion this year, that you would just change us because of what we see of you, because of who we see you are, and because we see your faithfulness over and over and over again. Thank you, God, that you've included us in your plan. Thank you that you've taken people who didn't deserve you to make us your children and include us in your kingdom. We ask this in your name. Amen. All right, you're done. Thank you.